Welcome back to RuggedMade. I'm Jared, and today I'm here with Jake from Dude Ranch DIY.
Hey everybody.
So Jake, it's great to have you here. I know we've been having a lot of fun. We've made a few other videos. Hopefully our viewers are going to see those other ones as well.
Yeah.
One of the topics that we've covered in a past video is how to operate your splitter, kind of just splitting 101. Today we wanted to tackle a question where we dig a little deeper into operating your splitter, which is if your splitter has options of splitting with, here we've just got your straight standard blade. Every splitter is going to have at least this, regardless of the make or model. A lot of splitters nowadays need to come with a four-way of some kind.
Right.
Here we've got a slip-on example that goes to our 700 series. Our 500 series has, the bolt-on wings that, again, that is in one of our other videos where we get all the splitters lined up together. That's a great one. And then we also have the Holy Grail, the six-way blade. So wanted to kind of pick your brains and kind of help our audience get a better sense of when does the four-way make sense? When do you need to take that off and just split with the straight blade, and when can you get away with the six-way and get that high productivity, get all those pieces in one pass?
Right.
So what's been your experience?
Me myself having this machine or a machine pretty similar to it, I do have all three of these options, and I got to say they're all great. I'd say out of all three, I use the four-way hands down the most, and that's probably followed by pretty equally the six-way and the single-way wedge. The single-way and the six-way are pretty unique in that they have a very specific purpose, I find, for the type of wood that I do and the type of splitting that I do. The four-way is kind of like your bread and butter. Most things can go through it. I'd say about 90% of things can go through it, and about 10% of all the wood I split I use for that six-way or that single-way wedge. The times I find myself using the single-way is really when I have a really big round. Granted, I do tree work, so I'm bringing home a lot of the wood from trees that I take down.
Okay.
So I have large trunks of trees, sometimes getting up to 40 inches in diameter.
When the wood's free, you can't always be picky.
Right, exactly. So I find, because I'm also not always splitting with a second person, that when I'm by myself and I have one of those big rounds, the log lift is a great asset to have. You can get that big round up onto the splitter.
Yeah.
But when you're by yourself, although a lot of the time the machine has the power to push through it, or push it through using the four-way wedge, it's kind of hard to manage four really big quarters of wood being by myself, because one wants to go that way, one wants to go this way, and I can't be in two places at once.
Yeah,
so that's when,
out.
right, so that's when I like to use that single-way wedge, because although it's going to take two more cycles to get it into four pieces, it's a lot more manageable. You don't have pieces falling over, you don't have to go back and get them. You're just dealing with two pieces, which can pretty easily be pushed onto your catch tray here.
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive that sometimes going back to the straight blade is more efficient.
Right, because there's if you do that four-way and you're trying to be a hero, sometimes those pieces go all over the place. And even, if it is in four pieces, that's still a pretty sizable chunk of wood to have to get back onto the splitter. So that's kind of my take on the single-way wedge there.
So it sounds like these are really different tools in the toolbox. You got to pull out the right tool depending on the situation. So let's talk a little more about how do you determine when you're going to use which one? We've got a few different logs here, but I think type of wood is one factor, and size is another. So tell us a little about how you would make that decision based on, all right, here are the logs I'm going to split today, or even within one session of splitting, you might be dealing with totally different kinds of logs. Right. Different, for different batches, different trees, different, so what are the factors?
I think some other factors are definitely, like you said, species of wood. Everybody knows that oak splits, for the most part, really nice. It pops open, similar to ash. Maple can be a little bit iffy here and there. Elm is definitely a really stringy type of wood, as is hickory. But all species of wood, no matter if it's oak or hickory or elm, it's you're going to be dealing with knots a lot of the time. Not everybody gets perfect firewood poles out of the forest. So if you're dealing with knots and they're sizable knots, a lot of time it's going to be easier and you're going to get nicer end product of wood if you're not using the six-way, and sometimes not even using the four-way, but just using that single-way wedge, because you can really cater and turn the piece of wood to avoid going through that knot, which makes it easier on the machine. And at the end of the day, you're going to get a nicer, more uniform split than a piece where you're trying to go right through that knot.
Now, what about, given different breeds and different diameters of log, how important would you say seasoning and moisture is to whether you can get it past a 4-way or get it past a 6-way, or you still need to go to the straight blade?
Right. Most of the time, at least from my experience, I'm splitting wood that has been freshly cut down. So
Okay.
a lot of the time it's green wood. I don't have the space or the time to really be cutting up rounds of wood and then waiting for them to season, so to speak, and then split them. And at the end of the day, only about 4 inches on either side of those cuts, in my opinion, is really gonna dry out to any great extent. It's still gonna be pretty wet on the inside. When dealing with a machine of this size, I really don't think it matters. If you're using a kinetic style splitter and trying to split really big rounds, or a much smaller style splitter, maybe it would matter a little bit more, but I even think your 300 series 22-ton machine doesn't make much of a difference for the most part when splitting green versus seasoned rounds.
Well, Jake, I appreciate that insight, especially when it comes to how much seasoning and drying really happens. We all want to live in the perfect world where we split and then the stuff sits there seasoning for 2 years. It's almost kiln dried,
Right.
and then we split it, and you just start it and it just goes pop. That's not the real world.
Right.
We're splitting in December for wood we're going to burn that day. That's the world a lot of us really live in. So, but it's good to know that in your experience, a bit of seasoning certainly does help.
Yeah.
You can tell the difference between drier wood and it does pop and it splits. You sometimes don't even have to complete a whole outbound stroke to get it fully split.
Right.
But the greener, stringier stuff is, I think, what a lot of people are dealing with on a daily basis, which is why this is, I think, an interesting question. When can they use which blade?
Right. I definitely agree. I think if we were comparing an axe to a splitter, then definitely a drier piece of wood would be more effective if using like a splitting maul or an axe to split. But these machines, technology has gotten to the point where we can split green wood and it works pretty well.
Well, we've got some wood to split. Why don't we fire up the machine and see what happens when we maybe match up the right kind of log to the right kind of blade, and when we match up maybe too much log for given blades.
All right, sounds good. Let's do it.
So why don't we start with the 4-way? It's pretty much industry standard these days. Every machine seems to come with a 4-way. And just a moment ago, you said that most of your splitting is able to be done with the 4-way.
Yeah, I use the 4-way all the time. I think it is really suited for all size, pieces of wood, even getting down to your final size splits. I really like it because you can make really uniform size pieces of wood. And that's important to me as I sell firewood. So if you have a stove or a fireplace that only takes certain size pieces, or you find it's easier to get uniform square pieces or triangle pieces into your small insert or wood stove, the 4-way is really good for that. And you also have the benefit of taking a full-size round and busting it into 4 smaller pieces in one push, as opposed to the single-way wedge. So the 4-way is found on my machine most of the time, and it's a real time saver.
All right, so why don't you pick a log that you think is kind of the ideal size for 4-way, kind of maybe on the bigger side that it can split.
Yeah, I mean, so I like to use it honestly for some of these bigger pieces. The only downfall is that sometimes it can be split into 4 pieces and it's hard to manage. But I think with the two of us here, once that bigger piece is split, we can each kind of grab a side and put it back onto the log lift and make some really nice firewood.
All right. Yeah.
So a good thing with the 4-way is that we just busted up that big round into 4 pieces. It was nice having you to catch it.
Yeah.
But now that the pieces are a little bit more manageable, this piece doesn't really need to be split into 4. So if you orient it horizontally, it's going to glide right under those 4-way wings and just be split into 2 and make a nice uniform piece of wood.
Now, to get a log down to the size this will be after this next pass, is that for the firewood that you sell, or would it be the same for firewood that you're going to burn yourself?
Generally, because I'm burning in a wood stove, I don't mind to have slightly larger pieces, but I gear my firewood for selling to typically be smaller. One, because it dries faster, and two, I want everybody to be able to handle it. So a piece this size, although it is a little bit big, I would put this in my stove, but I'd like everybody to be able to pick up my firewood with one hand and easily be able to, maneuver it and load it into a basket or a wheelbarrow.
Interesting. So once you've gotten a log that size broken down, I mean, these pieces are pretty much ready to burn or sell, but we still have that first half. Would you ever swap out the blade if you were running a machine that had that option?
Absolutely. So once we popped this open, or before we popped it open, I should say, it wasn't apparent that there was a big knot in there. So if we show everybody, that is a pretty gnarly crotch. You can see here where it split into two and then came back into one. There was even another little knot over here. So that would be a good candidate, at least in my mind, to pop off the four-way, which is pretty easily done once we get this wood out of here. And if we're going for uniform size pieces and consistent size pieces and neat pieces that aren't all, mangled up, I think the single-way wedge would be a great candidate to bust that in half, and then we can put back on the four-way.
Okay. Yeah, let's try that. So I noticed after you took the four-way off, broke that down into smaller pieces, you went right back to the four-way.
Yeah. So once you split that big piece right down the middle, because you have the single wedge there, it's easy to line up the center line of that knot with the tip of the blade, and then it basically just split it into two perfect pieces, and you're able to avoid a lot of that knot. Then once you send this through the four-way, you're left with this knot. If you orient it properly, you can basically get this knot to the left of the wedge and up above this wing. So you're isolating that knot to basically one piece of wood. So although this wood is a little bit stringy, you can maximize the amount of clean wood that you're able to produce while minimizing your really gnarly pieces.
Yeah. Well, we'd split some of this wood before you came, so we knew this was, stringy and had some knots. So, I mean, we weren't trying to, make it look easy by getting some perfect straight grain stuff.
No, by no means. This is
real.
Yeah, definitely a real piece and real knots that, aren't the easiest to split, but this machine makes it a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, but it's interesting how once it was split open and you can get your eyes on the grain, then you have a little more control over where you line up the blade. And
when I'm splitting, I like to always keep the knots facing up. That way I can see the orientation, and you can kind of, isolate it to a quarter or a half, depending on which wedge you're using to, just isolate that knot to like one sector, so to speak.
Okay, so we can finish off this log, and then what should we do next? Maybe find a piece that you think is a good candidate for the six-way?
Yeah, we got a couple pieces over here that would be great candidates.
Something like this?
When you're using the six-way, I think diameter is the biggest factor, because if you try and use too big of a piece, you're left with six really big pieces, and you're then going to have to go back and split them again. And the six-way really isn't the best at that because of all the blades going everywhere. So I find if you have nice uniform, diameter pieces, you can send it through once, one and done.
Now that looked like it split pretty nicely.
That split nice and easy, and you're left with some pretty uniform pieces. What typically happens, I find, when you're using a six-way with a round that's too big, is that the round sits higher up above the six-way, so these two pieces on the top, and sometimes even on the sides, if it's big enough, are going to be significantly larger than your 2 pieces on the bottom. And in this case, here's a piece coming off the top, and here's a piece coming off the bottom. And although the one on the top is a little bit larger, it's not so much larger that it's, you know, unburnable or, you know, it's a problem.
Yeah.
In other words,
I mean, it's not a precise science.
Right.
But
Exactly.
that looks
So
like,
you know, we're not going for absolutely perfect, but you know, the 6-way has its place, and when you have that perfect diameter, it makes things move a lot quicker.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was an interesting point you made about you want the customer to be able to just grab each piece with one hand and just, you know, stack their wood or stoke their furnace. That's really interesting.
Absolutely.
Let's grab another one. I think we got a
Okay.
couple more here that maybe will split just as well, and then we'll maybe try one that won't split so well.
All right. So as you can see, it even splits elm with relative ease when it's nice straight grain and a decent size.
Yeah.
So the elm is definitely showing its stringiness here, but
Still a
you
little
know,
bit green too.
yeah, it's definitely wet on the inside, but for the most part, we have some pretty nice uniform pieces, and you know, the 6-way shines when you have that right diameter. I really think that's the key.
Yeah. All right, so we've seen 2 different logs, you know, 2 different styles of wood that both split, but they had a similar diameter.
Right.
Should we tackle one of these monsters and see what happens when
We
you
can
get
let's
too
take one
ambitious?
of the big ones and we can show you know, what the 6-way does to a big piece of wood.
Yeah.
All right, here goes nothing.
Yeah, that's just
So pretty much,
too much
as I think we
resistance.
both thought, it's just too much friction there.
yeah.
And not to mention, as you can see, this is a great example of how these pieces on the bottom are going to be your nice uniform. Then you got these middle pieces, which are going to be small or a little bit larger than these, but smaller than the top. And these tops, you know, they could be whole logs just themselves.
So it begs the question, why not just go with the straight blade, break this into quarters,
Right.
and then go with a 4-way or 6-way at that point?
Rounds this size, I really think the single way is the best way to do it. You quarter it up using the single. If you go ahead and try and use the 4-way, you're still going to be left with that issue that your 2 bottom quarters are going to be significantly smaller than these larger ones. And these larger ones might be too much for some people to handle.
Yeah.
And, you know, even if you are able to lift it and move it around, why stress yourself out? Take the little extra time. Use that single-way wedge, and I think in the end, the machine's going to be happier, your wood's going to be more uniform, and it's going to be easier.
Yeah, and not only are we not able to split this with the 6-way on there, but we pretty much have a situation now where it's kind of jammed on there.
Right.
Let's see how hard it is.
You know, it's pretty well on there, so I think this might be a case for
Yeah.
the old sledgehammer.
Yeah, this is not what you want to set yourself up for.
There we go. So if we slip this off, I think we can
Yeah, now let's see what happens.
bust this down pretty easily.
So I saw you went right back to the 4-way once you had it quartered.
Yeah, so that's the beauty of, you know, these wedges, just slip it on and off, is that you can go right from that single to the 4-way, and once you have it, you know, quartered up into what I'd say are pretty identical size quarters, you can throw back on that 4-way and it'll make nice size firewood pretty consistently.
Yeah, and I think you have a lot of flexibility over just how small you want to go.
Right.
And
Everybody has unique, you know, standards and
Yeah.
sizes that they want, if they're selling, if they're using it for themselves.
Is it for a bonfire? Is it for an indoor furnace?
Exactly, and how fast do you want it to dry?
Yeah.
Or do you need it to dry, in other words?
which is a great segue into what is going to be one of our upcoming videos on stacking and drying. So we'll be talking, be sure to check that one out. We'll be talking in a lot more detail about some of those considerations.
Yeah.
There is no one size fits all when it comes to these blades.
No, there isn't, which is why they're so easily interchangeable, and why, if you have a machine of this size, it's nice to be able to have both single, 4, and 6-way.
Yeah. Well, it's great to get the input from someone who really knows their way around splitting, and what as a tree expert about the wood itself and the way the grain works and how it dries, and that's really interesting. I hope our viewers have enjoyed this. So I want to thank Jake for coming up to visit us up here at RuggedMade again, and be sure to check him out at Dude Ranch DIY.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.
This has been fun.